Ramblings of a Semi-Coherent Drunk. God, I love Christmas. God, I love Christmas. I really do. There is honestly no other holiday season like it. This may come as something of a surprise from an outspoken atheist, but it's hands down my favorite holiday. Religious implications aside, I'm in love with the notion of everyone deciding that it's time to put aside differences and be kinder to one another, to act more charitably and graciously, and give the benefit of the doubt to the rest of the world, if for only a brief few weeks. Back in December of 2009, I was working as a security guard. I'd been bounced around from job site to job site for the last 6 months, but had finally settled down on a position as a fire watchman for a lumber mill out in Gaston, Oregon. On one particular afternoon, I went to Winco to cash a paycheck, and on the way over, I'd watched a fat woman pick a fight with another woman whose dog had just shit in her lawn. I laughed at the whole ordeal, these two bitter beings giving each other a rather vicious what for over a rather innocuous event. As a passerby, I kept my tongue and chuckled to myself, thinking, the Christmas spirit at work. By the time I had arrived, cashed my check and headed back, it had gotten dark. I was headed back to the Max. I had made it several blocks away from the Winco when a young woman walked up carrying far more bags of groceries than anyone could reasonably expect to get further than the parking lot. She urgently pleaded with me. "Excuse me, sir, could I please get a hand?" I immediately obliged. She was pretty and I assumed in her mid-20s. "Thank you so much," she said. "Yeah, no problem," I replied. She was headed the same direction I was, to the Max. Her car was broken down, and she had already purchased her groceries by the time that this fact was evident. We chatted on the way over, and she seemed a pleasant sort. Her Max stop ended up being about 4 stops before mine, so I got off early and helped her carry her things to her apartment, which ended up being quite the walk from the station. As she went in her door, she offered me some cookies that I turned down. When she offered to pay me, I told her it was unnecessary. It was Christmas time. You're supposed to do nice things. At any other time in my life, those words would have been spit sarcastically through a very faked grin, but in that instance felt very sincere. And I did feel good. Someone was genuinely screwed, and I was able to help in a very direct way. I wished her a Merry Christmas and headed back to the Max station. To this day, I couldn't tell you anything about her. I can't remember if she was a student or if she had a job. I seem to recall delighting her with the story about the dog shitting on the lawn, but short of that, there's very little that comes to mind. I don't even remember her name, and I never saw her again. But I remember that event from time to time. It's a nice reminder to myself that I'm not the complete dickhead my selective memory often inclines me to believe that I am. Peace on earth and mercy mild. Mild. Mild sauce. Upon awakening from a Taco Bell-induced coma this morning, this had been my first thought. The night prior, my fiancé and I had purchased about $40 worth of Taco Bell, otherwise known as the precise amount required to not only guarantee your diabetes, but your future lineage's diabetes as well. Today was the day we were supposed to finally go and get a Christmas tree. My mind was tearing itself apart. On one side was the lethargy and self-hatred that comes from consuming so much brown-colored meat-flavored paste, and on the other was a bizarre satisfaction that only comes when you go to munch down on that last Chipotle chicken griller in the bottom of the now vacuous and empty bag. I'll admit I wasn't thrilled to be getting another Christmas tree. Not so much in the having of the tree, but in the acquiring and sustaining of it. My previous endeavor with Christmas trees had been a less than brilliant affair. The first and most obvious snag was transportation of the goddamn thing. At the time, back in 2013, I had no car, but lived well within a walking distance of a Fred Meyer's. My foolish hubris at the time assumed that after those grunts at Fred Meyer's had tied the tree up, it would be no problem to just toss the thing over my shoulder and carry it home. How foolish indeed. For one thing, they don't tie the tree up. Or at least the fellow I was dealing with had no idea how to do so. Secondly, trees are made of goddamn wood. Wood is goddamn heavy. More so when it's still alive. So immediately I was presented with a bunch of bullshit. I'd already paid for the fucking thing, and come hell or high water, I was getting that motherfucker to my goddamn house. I was forced to improvise. I borrowed a shopping cart, slammed the tree in, and pushed it to my apartment, where I carried it up to the second floor. Fortunately for my sake, it was one of those plastic shopping carts, so pushing it over sidewalks and such didn't cause it to rattle like a Christmas bell in its death throes. Unfortunately, it had a gacked wheel. Because of course it would. Not only would I have to accept the reality that here I was, semi-buzzed on cheap beer and a straw cowboy hat, pushing a Christmas tree along in a shopping cart on the main street of Tualatin, but it had to be difficult to do as well. And it was raining heavily. Fate tends to have a sense of humor whenever one engages in these sorts of ill-thought endeavors. At any rate, I got the tree home, and thoughtfully pushed the empty cart back when I was done with it. Now, rule of thumb as I assume it goes in most households, is that the tree is only up through the end of the month. Or at least until it starts dying. It is rarely considered a good idea to leave the thing up until March, especially in a household where smoking inside is considered obligatory. By January, the thing didn't even register in my brain. It just occupied a space near the kitchen that I never used for anything else, so there it stayed. My guests would comment on it almost immediately. "When are you getting rid of that goddamn thing?" "Yeah," would be my only response. It was just there. A bone dry, clear and present danger to the rest of my apartment complex that I was blissfully unconcerned with. I didn't even manage to take the decorations off until February. I guess at that point it had become a bit unsightly. It was only then, when I'd started taking off the lights, that I noticed the parts where the lights had burned into the tree. The lights hadn't been on since December, but this was still a sign that something had to be done. So naturally, I waited a few more weeks and then went to actually move the thing. I had discovered that in that 3 or 4 months the tree had been leaning in the corner, it had lost a lot of its weight. That's handy. Makes moving it a breeze. The second and perhaps more irritating thing that I had noticed is that in its prolonged dehydration, every single needle on that fucking tree had become so brittle that so much as a small fart in its direction caused enough pressure to make it fall off. This registered in my brain as a very serious problem, as the stairwell to my apartment was a less than charitable one when it came to moving large, odd-shaped objects up and down it. By the time I got the thing down to the dumpster, I'd be carrying kindling. There had to be an easier way. And that's when I thought of my father. A few years back, my father had helped me move my things out of an apartment I'd occupied for about 3 months, so it didn't have the burden of having a lot of shit in it. In fact, the only thing of issue was the large leather couch that had come with the apartment. It was a comfy leather couch, but it was torn up, and there certainly is no shortage of secondhand couches out there. We had to get rid of the damn thing, but between the two of us, carrying it down the stairs was going to be a bitch. So we chucked it over the balcony. And I wish there were a more graceful way to put it. But that was it. We carried it out to the patio door, set it on the balcony, counted to 3, shouted, "Heads up!" The loud thud likely irked the small Mexican woman who lived below as she peeked out the shades with a look of incredulity that my words failed to describe, while my father and I ran down and carried the damn thing to a dumpster. So that's what I did with my tree. I went downstairs, knocked on the neighbor's door, and informed them that in a minute, a tree would be slamming in front of their patio. "Yeah, it's my Christmas tree." "Christmas tree? It's April." Yeah, I drink a lot. I dragged the damn thing from the kitchen, through the living room, into the patio, leaving a light green trail of tiny little needles the whole way through. I opened the door, moved the chair and the table to the other side of the patio, and chucked the fucker. I realized that this must have been some sort of spectacle for my neighbors. And not only was I not that terribly concerned with their opinions on the subject, but I wanted the damn thing gone. I hurried down, grabbed the tree, and chucked it in the dumpster. I don't know where you put a tree 3 months after everyone else has discarded theirs, but it seemed like the only place that made sense. When the deed was done, I went back to my apartment. I had earned my cigarette on the patio. The house was a war zone. Furniture was all hastily moved out of the way. Every flat surface in the house was dusted in a dry, dead pine needles. I grew up out in the woods, and even out there, you never see a carpet of needles like that. It took 20 minutes to vacuum it all up, and when I was done, I went out and had my smoke. On the dirt beneath my balcony, there in a lazily drawn tree shape, was another blanket of needles that had fallen off when I tossed the tree. In my embarrassment, I ran out and swept up as much as I could, but it proved futile. Fuck it, I thought. I've left my mark. I only hope some child in one of the neighbors' apartments saw the whole thing, and in his head, the gears turned. Wait, we could be celebrating Christmas all year? We totally could. That guy did it till March. What else is Mom lying to me about?